everyone. My name is Shakila, and I am here with the author of Unspoken Words, an Open Diary, Fareeda Washington, and you're watching the first segment of Speaking Unspoken Words. So how are you feeling today, Fareeda?
I'm feeling good. I'm excited. I'm excited to be interviewed by you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Well, I am feeling excited as well just to see you on your journey and how this process has been for you and to be a part of that process. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I'm just proud of you, friend.
Well, thank you.
For having a dream, a vision, and actually carrying it out.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get right into it. So the title of your book is Unspoken Words, an Open Diary.
Yes.
So how did you come up with that title, and what does that title mean to you?
Unspoken Words, I realized in the process of writing the book that there have been so many things that I had gone through in my life, and looking back over those things, I never talked about it. I never spoke with anyone about it. I think the adults in my life at the time, my parents, different situations and circumstances that we found ourselves in, they were just trying to survive. Mm-hmm. Like, they were trying to figure out what the next move was going to be for our family. And so, maybe they didn't have the tools that they needed to kind of stop and process either what was going on. So as a result of that, I just kind of held everything in, and I just kept moving. And, years later, as things are happening as an adult and you're going through these different circumstances, you realize, like, those old things, you buried them, you never dealt with them. So they come back up. And so I just realized that was a pattern that I developed, that I had not spoken. A lot of things in the book are things that I never shared with anyone before, that I never spoke with my parents about, that I never spoke with close friends or family about. And so I just felt like it was my diary. It was me writing and getting everything out that I kept just kind of bottled and buried down deep inside. So.
Okay. And I can say, from reading the book for myself, Unspoken Words, it had me thinking about the things that I hadn't spoke about or talked to people about. Because oftentimes, I think many of us can relate that we think we're the only ones going through it.
Oh, yeah.
Or it's a normal part of the process. This is just what it is, and we're supposed to accept it. It's supposed to be okay. So at reading your book, it kind of brought some things to light, some things to attention. So
my pastor,
I enjoyed it.
He has a saying. He says, you're not unique. And I think sometimes we get into our head and we think that we're unique, that we're the only people in the world that are going through this. And so I think that's part of the inspiration of the book, to share it, to know that, a lot of these circumstances, there's other people out there. There's probably a young girl, out there somewhere that's going through the same thing, or a young kid that's living in the same environment that, I've come from, that are going through some of these same challenges. And so we're not unique. We share these experiences with more people, but you don't know until you speak on those things. So.
Right. And it's just a reminder that we need each other. We're not meant to go through life by ourselves. We're all going through situations essentially not only to build us up, but to help the next person.
Yes.
So just wanted to share that. So how long would you say this book has been a dream or inspiration for you?
Ooh. As long as I can remember, I think, from the time that I started writing, like, I loved books as a young girl. I think I may have shared that in the book. I would go to the library and get, 4 or 5 books at a time. And that's how I spent my summers. While everybody else was out having fun and going to parties and doing everything else, I was, at home and getting lost in these stories, like getting lost in other people's lives and reading autobiographies and, different stories, and just kind of falling into that story and falling in love with that. I loved it, and I always wanted to do that. Like, I always wanted to write a book. And so when I start trying to write and writing poetry and things like that, I always thought that I would just do just a straight kind of poetry book. But this, of course, manifested into more than that. It's more of a memoir, but I always knew, from reading books, that I wanted to be
Okay, so this has been a dream of yours since you can remember. when did you actually start the process of writing the book?
Yeah, I think, and so that's kind of unique also in the sense that a lot of these poems are from throughout my life. Like a lot of the poems that are in the book are just poems that I wrote at different stages in my life, from the time that I was 14, high school, college, even to now. And I think I wrote one of the books as I was, wrote one of the poems as I was writing the book. So it's really, I've been writing the book without knowing I was writing, I've been writing and putting these things on paper. And so it was just bringing my life together, bringing all these stories together, bringing the poems together in a form, in a format. But yeah, I would say since I was 14, since I wrote that first poem, I started the journey of writing the book. Yeah.
Okay, and so you actually started writing the book during COVID, right?
Yes.
So what was that process like?
Yeah, so that was interesting. That was unique. I think at that time, I would say I'd been diagnosed with depression. I've been diagnosed with depression, I think, right before the pandemic. So maybe at the end of 2017.
Okay.
And it was a journey that I had to go through, my healing journey of trying to get to, better myself, work on my mental health. And then right after going through that process, the pandemic, happened. So then we find ourselves kind of locked in the home, can't go anywhere, you're not busy anymore. You don't have this schedule where you're working, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're going here and going there. And so you just have time. And so I felt like I wanted to utilize that time to work on my dream. Like, what better time to do it? Right. I've got all the time in the world. So the process was kind of, I don't know. I just felt like one day it was like, okay, this is the time. You need to start. You need to put it together. And initially, even then, so in 2020, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do a poetry book. Okay. So I started pulling out like old notebooks, binders, like all these loose papers that I had that were in buckets and barrels from, years and years and years ago. And, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna put all these poems together. Well, it's got to be some kind of format. I just don't want it all over the place and all random. So I'm like, well, let me group them together by, kind of category and what I'm speaking about. And then it's like, well, I've never performed my poetry live in front of people. And so this will be the first time that I'm introducing my poetry to people, and the first time that they'll be hearing or, reading it or experiencing it. So I'm like, well, they're not going to know how I would say it and what my candor would be like. So I need to explain like what this meant or what I was going through at the time. And so then it became, okay, well, I'm just going to put short stories before, the titles or the groups or, the categories of the poems. And so it just started taking form like that. And I would stay up. Most of the time we still had, I think my son was in school and, they were going homeschooling at the time.
So he's at home doing
online school. Yeah. So of course, still focusing on him. We're still, kind of working during the day. So a lot of times, I've always found my peace kind of in the evenings. And I remember as a little girl, I would be washing dishes after my brothers were, upstairs in their room or getting ready for bed, or my parents were away and the house was just kind of quiet. I would listen to the Quiet Storm on the radio and just be washing dishes. So I've always found a peace in like the evening time and just in my me time. And so that was kind of the same process with the book. In the evenings when he was away to bed and I just had my peace and my quiet, I would go into the office and, I would just sit at the desk and write the short stories and, organize the book, put the poems together. So.
Okay. So in the you mentioned that you put them in different categories.
Yeah.
So the categories are life, heartbreak, love, evolution, and self. How did you come up with those 5 topics?
So there is a philosopher, Maslow. I never say his name right. Maslow, I believe, is his name. And his 7, and his theories. And so that just kind of came to mind when I was thinking like, oh, okay. And so he's talking about these things that every human has in common, and kind of approached the book the same way. Well, what are my categories? What are things that I feel like every human has in common, that everybody, no matter where you're from, no matter what your background is, that everybody is going to be able to relate to these things in some kind of way. Your story, your experiences may not be the same as mine, but we have a commonality in that we have all experienced it in our own way. And so we're all living life. Like we're all here. We're lifing, we're all here. God has given us, this gift of life, and we're all living at this time. We are, hopefully, if you're lucky, you're going to experience love, whether it be from, your parents, a spouse, a friend, child, in some kind of form or way. God, you hopefully are going to have the experience of love, heartbreak. I think that's just something we can't get out of this life without experiencing heartbreak in some form of another. And that could be, like I said, that could be losing a pet, or losing, a friend, or losing a job. So it doesn't just have to be romantically. And then, on the evolution of, our journey, we hopefully we're evolving, as we're going through this journey. The goal is to evolve as a person and to grow as a person, and in that, learning yourself and who you are, and so I kind of put those things together, like what are shared commonalities that we all have that are that transcend, race, gender, ethnicity, all those things. So.
Yeah. And as I was reading the book, I definitely saw myself in each category. You hear your story, then you start thinking about, what's my story?
Yeah.
What have I went through? What heartbreaks, the love, what the evolution of things, what have I been working on within myself, So the book really got me to really thinking and opening up some things. So I was just like, ooh, I can write my own book, it gets you kind of thinking like that, like my story, and my story is important. And, I think the book would definitely open up some people's eyes to that, and get them to thinking about their own story and what they can share with somebody else to help them along the way.
Absolutely. My cousin Marquita always says everybody has a story. She always, that's one thing she's always told me. And I think that's been the biggest blessing for me in writing the book, is that people have come up to me and, oh my gosh, and we have some family secrets, or we've, our family has gone through these things and we never talked about it. And, that's been, I think, the biggest blessing for me, is that I have evoked conversation. And, I think, that's awesome. So,
yes. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the topics of the book. We're not going to touch every topic, but I just wanted to touch a few of them. And I wanted to go into your first reaction from your first poem.
Oh.
And so that was in a letter from the author, and I'm just going to read a little blurb. And it says, I did not know if she read the entire poem. It was not very long, but after what seemed like only a minute, she came busting into my room. I had seen that look on her face before. She was upset. The scowl across her face was not at all what I was expecting. All that I remember was being so confused and surprised that I could barely make out the words that she said. What I could piece together was that she was doing her best, and how dare I complain, times are hard. She said more words before leaving the room just as quickly as she had entered. So with that being your first reaction to your very first poem, how do you think that impacted the process of your writing, or the journey of it?
Yeah. I think what I knew immediately, although I didn't understand it, is that words have power. I didn't fully understand it then, but I knew that something that I had written had, conjured up this reaction from someone. And so I'm like, whoa, And so definitely, I think it made me more mindful, conscious of what I said, how I said it. If you read the book, like a lot of poems, I think are maybe inspirational or maybe positive, although a lot of them are just about what I've gone through. I've always, it's important to me to stay authentic to how I feel, regardless of what the reaction is going to be. At that time, being a child, I definitely think it didn't stop me from wanting to write. It did not stop me. That's just a passion that's deep down inside of me. And so I wasn't discouraged from writing, but I think I was definitely more careful and conscious about what I said and how I said it.
Okay. And so do you think your future, okay, I think you just said that, but so to kind of go in line with that, do you think the things that you kind of write now or write about today, you're conscious of the delivery of it, how people are going to receive that?
Yes, I am. And so it's a balance, right? Because when you're writing, for me, my process of writing, especially if I'm writing poetry, I can only write from my experiences. Or, or talking to a friend and their experience and they're telling me something and things like that. But I can only write from what I know. And so I absolutely think that I'm conscious about what I say, how I say it. Does it deter me? I think about it, will this, would a certain person take it a certain way?
Or do I change the language to land a little softer?
Yeah, and I think, that's me. And sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it depends on the topic. It depends on if I'm writing from my experience. And I would hope that if anything that I say or my perception of any of my experiences are taken in a negative light, that would allow us to be able to have a conversation.
Invoke the conversation.
Yeah, because I think, I have to allow people to have the space to have their opinions, thoughts, feelings about things. And I hope people allow me to do the same. And it just allows for us to have a conversation about it. And it is what it is.
It is. And that's the whole point of speaking, so we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, and your first section was Life Living Ain't Easy. You talk about essentially how you grew up, and you describe a conversation that you had with a friend. And I'm going just to read a blurb from that as well. And it says, I remember having a conversation with a friend about my perspective growing up. We grew up in the same neighborhood but had unique experiences. I told him how sometimes we went without lights or gas. Sometimes we didn't have enough food to eat. I shared having a gun pulled out on me and my brother when I was around 12 years old because the guy didn't like how my brother was looking at him. We talked about how I got into fights almost every summer. His response was that my experience was normal. And then I'm going to skip down. You said my insides cried out, no, that isn't normal. So how at that young age did you know this was not normal or I wanted more? This is not the life that I wanted.
There was something that I read this morning and it really resonated with me as I was doing my devotional. And it said that God sets you apart. He sets certain people apart. He sets us apart. And I really believe and feel that it was God's grace, that he had a calling for me to do something with my life, to break generational curses, to write a book that hopefully will inspire. And so because of that, I feel like he set me apart. I always felt, many times I felt out of place in my environment. Many times as a young child, I just knew, no, this is not okay. No, this is not right. And it was just something deep down inside of me. I remember I was probably in my 20s, starting my career working in corrections in Mr. Banks. We were driving when we had to go do those Western runs and go and see the kids different places, and we were just talking and having a conversation. Mr. Banks was a pastor, and I think now looking back, he asked me a question to see where I was spiritually. And we were talking about how I grew up. We were talking about some of these things that are in the book, some of these different experiences. He asked me about my life, and we had like a 4-hour, car ride. And so we just got to talking. And I remember him asking me, looking back now, almost in a sarcastic way, it's like, wow, Fareeda, how'd you make it through that? How did you, out of everybody, of all your friends, your family, things like that, why are you different? And I didn't know. And my answer to him at that time, I don't know.
So what would your answer be today?
Yeah, my answer today is just that it was God's grace. It was I believe it was the calling that God has over my life to do something different, that he put that deep inside of me. He set me apart. He put something inside of me to not settle for where I was at, not settle for my circumstances, to know that my circumstances were not who I was or who I was meant to be. And so, yeah, it was the best answer that I had. Yeah.
A good answer. Yeah. Okay. So in the final section, we're going to go over in Heartbreak, Suffering, and Silence. You talk about losing your brother Jamal to cardiac arrest when you were only 18 years old. So how would you say that impacted you as a person?
Yeah. I think people say a lot, right? Life is short. Like that's this, it's a quote. It's like this cliche thing. Oh, life is short. Life is short. But I don't think people really live that. I don't think, on a day-to-day basis, like to wake up and know that I could be gone today, it makes you approach life differently. My brother was only 22 years old. He would have been 23 that year. Very young, very unexpected. We thought he was in good health. And just to get that phone call that he was no longer here, and I just seen him, we just spent this time together. I just seen him, and he was so young. Like, death doesn't discriminate against your age, your race, your gender. It doesn't, and we never know when our day and when our time is. So to have someone that I love that was so young, and then I experienced that at such a young age, it really changed that. It changed me in a way that I don't have time for foolishness. I don't entertain it for too long, I try to cherish the people that are in my life. And I let everybody know. I know I'm like the emotional friend, or, in a sense, there are some people, my spouse definitely probably wouldn't agree with that, but in a sense, like in a way though, I think that she would agree also that I am very expressive of my emotions. I tell people, like, if I'm on the phone with my friend, love you, friend, love you, my family, when we see each other, we're hugging each other coming in the door, we're hugging each other going out the door, we're telling each other that we love them. I love all my people. Every chance that I get, like, I love you, and I make that known, and I try to, in my interactions with people, make sure that those are positive interactions. Make sure I'd rather laugh. Like, we're going to laugh, we're going to have a good time, we're going to be silly, we're going to enjoy life, because we might walk away and I might not see you again, like, and or you might not see me again. And so I want to make sure that when that time comes, that you know that I loved you, that you know where you stood with me, that I know where I stood with you. And so I think that's how it changed me the most, to really appreciate life. Like, I can walk right now, we'll go, it might sound weird, but we work out, we'll go to the cemetery. Beautiful cemetery, one of the most peaceful places. Like, those people can't bother me. They're not bothering me at all. And we'll go and we'll walk, and you'll see these headstones of someone that was very, very young to someone that lived a long, long life. And what better, surrounding to appreciate life, to appreciate that I'm still above ground, to, look at the trees and to see the birds, and to just, really thank God for allowing me to inhale, allow that butterfly. Oh my God, that butterfly is so beautiful. That is not something that was made by men, so every day I try to, thank God, appreciate him for this life that we have, and enjoy it. And I think that was also an inspiration for the book. It's like, while I'm here, he gave me this life not to waste it, not to sit around and do nothing. We all have talents. We all have gifts. So what are you going to do with it? I tell people, and I don't know if I put it in the book or not, but when I go, I don't want to meet my maker. And he said, well, what did you do with the life that I gave you? What did you do with the gifts and the talents that I gave you? I don't want to be like the men in the Bible that buried buried their gifts. I want to say, Lord, I multiply, what you gave me. And so that was definitely an inspiration that I felt like, had I not written a book, had I not shared my gifts, had I not shared my experiences, that I would be letting God down, because that is a gift that he gave me. He gave me a gift to write, to touch people. Not only going back a little bit with the reaction that you said with my mother in that first poem that I ever wrote, and her reaction from it, when I got a little bit older, and saying, being conscious about what I was writing, I started working, and we were working at this place. It was a family-owned business, a sports bar and grill, and on Wednesday nights, we started to bring more people in, have like a poetry night. Mm-hmm. And there was this guy there, and man, he did the same poem every week. In this poem, he was talking bad about women, you on government assistance with all these kids and all these, baby daddies and this is that. And oh man, he would get the best reaction, especially from the men. They were clapping the loudest and stuff. And so I said, okay, I'm going to get him like... I got something for him, so I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna write a poem to uplift women, to be the opposite of what he's talking about. And I was so nervous, I was so scared. I'm like, but I've been working with these people for a while. Wasn't a whole lot of people in on a Wednesday night in a sports bar and grill, so it was just enough people where I could build up the courage to like say this poem. And so I remember I got the microphone and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I read this poem, and I just kind of went through it, and I'm saying it. And I remember going outside because I was just like, oh my gosh, oh, I did it, and I just had to breathe. So I was outside, and I will never forget, a young girl came up to me, had to be maybe at that time in her 20s, maybe early 30s. And she came up to me and she was just crying. She just grabbed me and she hugged me. She said, I just want to thank you. I needed that. I needed to hear that right now. I don't know this girl, didn't know her before, never seen her after, don't know what she was going through. But again, the gift that God gave me, when I share it, it showed me the power of words. It showed me how it can touch people. And so, that's.
Okay, so you have poured your heart into these pages, not only for yourself, but for others to read and take in as well. Would you say that the journey was worth it?
Yes. Absolutely. The journey was hard because it absolutely, like I said, it brought out things that I just buried. I thought I got over it. I thought I had gotten past it. But I remember one time sitting up at the table. I was sitting out on the kitchen table, and I was writing the part about how I found out about my brother. And waterfall. Like tears, like boo-hooing, crying, and just it took me back. For me to be able to translate that on a page, it took me going back to that time, to that moment, to how I felt, to what I smelled, to what I heard, to what I didn't hear, just being in that trance almost, and like trying to talk about that. And it was very cathartic. It was very cleansing for my soul to be able to, kind of talk about those things, to talk about even the, we didn't have the language of trauma back then. Yeah. Those are things that now we're just now starting to talk about trauma. When you grow up in certain environments and you experience certain things, and, I think my first my first experience with trauma, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old when the teenage boy got shot in front of our house, and looking out of the window, hearing the gunshots, hearing the commotion, looking out and seeing a dead, body of a young boy and his mother and brother, over him and holding his lifeless body in their hands. And how does that affect a 5 or 6 year old? What do you carry with you? And so never before speaking about those things, but now going back to that time and like, man, these are words that we have to put with it. Now you have, you were experiencing trauma, you were experiencing, these different things, and depression. I have a book, a poem in the book called A Depressed State of Mind, and really talking about, losing a friend of mine to suicide because her depression, not knowing what that looked like at the time, not knowing that a form of depression is being angry. A reaction to depression is comes out in anger. So when you're looking at someone and you're, I didn't see it in myself. It took someone else to call that out. It took, my spouse to call that out in me and say, no, you're not yourself. You're depressed, and not knowing how to put these things. So I think going through all of that, to answer your question, to open up old wounds. Sometimes I think what I did was just try to cover up those wounds, but not heal and treat them. So they were still rotten up under. They were still rotten. They just had bandages over them. They were still rotten. So to open them up and allow them to heal, and to constantly do the work. There was a time I did go, I saw a therapist. I did medication for a while just to get me back to myself. And I'm constantly doing the work spiritually, with my church family in Christ Temple North. So spiritually, mentally, emotionally, constantly doing the work. But to go back, to open up those old wounds, but to have a result, to have those people come up to me and tell me, share with me their stories, or, God willing, that it allows them to be able to speak. If there's just one person that, something that I went through that they can relate to, and it can inspire them or give them hope to, change, or, that it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah, because it sounds like even though you had to go through that journey and open those wounds or rediscover wounds that you had forgot about or didn't remember, it was a healing process. Absolutely. It allowed you to heal.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that was beneficial in itself.
Absolutely.
Going through that process. Yeah. So you talked about the depressed state of mind in the book being a poem. So what would you say is your favorite poem, if you have one?
Ooh.
And then why is that your favorite poem?
Ooh, my favorite. Yeah, that
or
was
they kind of
tough.
all like your babies, like.
Yeah, that was tough because of course, I would say maybe between Truth and Tell Me a Little Black Girl Story.
Okay.
Those are, I think Truth was just me really coming into just becoming a more spiritually grounded person and knowing who God is in your life. And when you have God in your life and you start to develop a relationship with Him, there's nothing better than that. So I think Truth was absolutely a great poem to write. I remember being in a flow with that one, just like yeah. And then Tell Me a Little Black Girl Story, I think I wrote that during the process of writing the book. And there were different things that were going on. We have the George Floyd and all the racial tension that's going on in the world now. And I think Tell Me a Little Black Girl Story, it kind of speaks to the biases or the prejudice or the those preconceived type of things that people put on being a Black girl from the ghetto, and what that looks like or who she is. And, that poem is just saying, like, no, we're not this. We're not this one thing. We're not what you think that we are. We're so much more. We're so fly. We're so dope. like we, you know, we're in tap. And it was inspired by a lot of women around me. You know, it was inspired by you. It was inspired by my cousin Markina. It was inspired by you know, her daughter, who is I think she was either doing tap or ballet or, you know, some dance or just different things. It was inspired by Nina Simone and, you know, just all these, Kamala Harris, you know, I think that was, you know, her being the vice president, you know, and just so many different awesome people to be able to showcase who we are. Like, no, I'm not what you think I am. I'm not just this one thing. I'm so many different things. And so let me tell you a little bit about who we are, you know. So that one was really fun too. So yeah, I was able to use.
I love it. Well, as we wrap this up, is there anything else you want the people to know?
I mean, look forward to more episodes. Thank you again, friend, for doing this. And, you know, and I want to do this more. I want to have more conversations, you know, about different topics and different things of the book where, you know, if people have any questions, comments, they can email me at unspokenwords.aod@gmail.com. We'll put, you know, the social media outlet, links and outlets and information out there so people can tune in and watch the different episodes. And you know, I want to keep this going. Let's keep the conversation going about unspoken words and speaking unspoken words.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all in the next episode. Well, you'll see her on the next episode.
All right.